I come across many stories, and this story is one of those stories that really got to me. Uh, the events that happened in this story were so horrible and so shameful as to why they happened. Sometimes things just don't make sense, family. You guys tell me what you think. On May 6, 1976, on a Thursday afternoon, around 2 p.m., Chicago Police Department arrived at 140 South Whipple Street on the west side of Chicago. They had received a phone call saying that there was a suspicious vehicle that appeared to have been abandoned. Upon arriving, Chicago police noticed that there was a maroon 1972 Thunderbird. One of the officers immediately looked at the front sticker on the windshield, and he noticed an Elk Grove Village location. The front window had been smashed in, but it was covered by cardboard. The ignition had been ripped out, and there were no hubcaps. The car hadn't been stripped all the way down like a professional thief would do, so the officers figured that possibly teenagers had taken the car for joyriding. When they ran the plates, they discovered that the vehicle had not been reported stolen, and that the person that owned the vehicle was a Frank Columbo who resided in Elk Grove Village. Elk Grove is a suburb northwest of Chicago. This case comes out of Elk Grove Village, located in Illinois. Here are 4 fun facts about Illinois people may not know. Chicago is the largest city in Illinois. The capital is Springfield. The state bird is the North Cardinal, and the state flower is the violet. Good people, I'm going to tell you what happened, and that's what it is. If you're from Illinois, please feel free to leave a comment below. Patricia Columbo was born June 21st, 1956. She was the first child for Mary and Frank Columbo. Patricia was her parents' everything. They treated her like gold, and they loved this little girl. She remained their only child in the center of their existence until she was 6 years old. At that time, her brother Michael was born. Although she appeared to like her brother Michael, family and friends say that she was always jealous of him. Family and friends stated that Patricia was very jealous and envious of her brother Michael because of the attention that her dad gave to Michael individually, because he was their only son and he was a proud dad of a boy. By the time she was a teenager, she was receiving lots of attention from the boys because she was a nice-looking young lady. She was known to be wild and promiscuous with the boys. She was strong-willed and determined, and as for some reason she decided to drop out of high school when she was only 16 years old. She would steal credit cards and go in stores and use those cards without authorization. Patricia was hired in the cosmetics department at Walgreens. During that time, she stole an employee's credit card, and she racked up thousands of dollars worth of charges. Her father bailed her out because he loved his daughter. He paid restitution, which is to the courts and to the victim, and it didn't matter because the judge had had enough of Patricia. In July of 1974, she was convicted of practices of deception and sentenced to 2 years of probation. Around the same time when her situation with court was winding down, Patricia was actively carrying on an affair with Frank Deluca, who she had met while working at Walgreens. Frank Deluca was born April 1st, 1967. Frank was a pharmacist for Walgreens, but through the years and dedication, he had worked himself into the position of a manager. And he had been there since 1961, or maybe 62. He had been promoted to being a manager, and at the time he met her, it was around 1972. At that time, he was 36 years old, a married man with 5 children, and a reputation for being a swinger around town. People knew that this guy got down, and that he didn't care about his family. He didn't care about his kids and the hurtful things that they found out about him and his sexual appetite. Patricia, also known as Patty by her family and friends, began to have sex with Frank around this time. She was only 16 years old. The diabolical behavior that Frank Luca, a grown adult male, acted out with Patty, a 16-year-old, would have been intolerable in today's world. But the 1970s was a different time and place, and people were more tolerable of things that shouldn't have been. She was the youngest person that Frank had messed with, but she wasn't the first. She began to indulge in the swinger parties and other sexual situations along with Frank. On May 7th, after Chicago police notified Elk Grove Village that Frank Columbo's Thunderbird had been found abandoned, Elk Grove Police Department spent 2 hours trying to contact someone in the Columbo home. To no avail, they couldn't get in contact with anyone. Every time they called, the phone would go straight to being busy. And so after a few hours of trying, dispatcher went ahead and sent an officer out to the location so that they can personally inform someone in that household that they had found a car belonging to Frank Columbo. The police sent an officer to that house. The residence was at 55 Brentwood Avenue, located in Elk Grove. The officers figured that Mr. Columbo wouldn't have been in Chicago because he didn't know anyone in that area. And if he was in that area, why would he leave his car in such a state, with the damage that had occurred to it, and not report it? So the purpose of going to the home was to notify the family that they had found a car and it was damaged. When police arrived at the residence, the first thing they noticed was several days' worth of newspapers piled up at the door. In fact, there were 3 days' worth of papers gathered around the front door on the porch. The storm door was closed but unlocked, and the front door was ajar. This was instantly something that the officers, being seasoned veterans, knew this wasn't normal. They suspected that there was possibly an intruder. They could hear the dog barking from the inside, but there was no answer when they knocked on the door. The officer then got on the radio and he made a backup call. While he waited, he strolled around the outside of the property and he noted that the mail also had not been collected, and that there was an absence of vehicles in the driveway or the garage. With the exception of the front door, every window and every door appeared to be secured and unharmed. Both males, the officers, then entered the Columbo home when the first backup cop showed up. When the officers entered the home, they found a gruesome and bloody crime scene where something horrific had taken place. Frank was age 43, was the first person they had located in the home. He was in the living room. A shredded and bloodied lamp was close by, and he was laying on his back with broken glass all around him. He was wearing a t-shirt, plaid jeans, and socks. He had obviously been deceased for several days. Mary Columbo, age 40, was the second victim that was discovered. She was found laying on her back on a landing outside the bathroom. There were gold figurine patterned towels that she had lovingly painted by hand. She had a 1-inch gash across her throat and a bullet wound that was partially between her eyes and the bridge of her nose. A bloody magazine and a piece of an artificial fern plant were found next to her body. On the floor next to Mary's head was broken jewelry and shattered glass everywhere. As soon as the police were able to get in touch with the police department, they had an investigator squad and an evidence technician come to the crime scene immediately. The first investigator to reach the crime scene was Detective Raymond Rose. He arrived at 5 p.m. The first thing he observed was Mary Columbo's still present large diamond ring on her left hand, as well as remains of Frank and Mary Columbo lying there lifeless. Mary's handbag and its contents, together with an ashtray and a cigarette case, were discovered in the bathroom. When Detective Rose continued to examine the crime scene, he noticed that there were 4 human teeth laying between the top of the stairs and the wall. Michael, the third victim, a 13-year-old, was a brother of Patty, the son of Mary, and the son of Frank. Michael was in his room. He was found wearing a white t-shirt, blue trousers, and he was laying on his back on the floor. He appeared to have both a left side and a back bullet wound, and his head was covered in blood. Michael also sustained numerous stab wounds to his chest and his neck. On his desk, there was a pair of gold-plated scissors with cross blades, and next to his body was a bowling trophy on a marble base. Both were covered in blood. Detective Rose discovered a magazine that had been crumbled, loose change, beads, and a piece of fake fern on the floor. The trash had been dumped. The telephone was off the hook. One of the cabinets was unlocked, and a personal phone book had the name and the phone number of the Columbo's eldest kid listed on it. The bed was still neatly made, as if no one had laid there all night. The bedside alarm clock, which had been set for 9 a.m., was buzzing, and everything appeared to be in order with no signs of looting. A 9-inch knife and a steak knife were discovered outside the home, close to the front porch, around the rock garden area. Detectives immediately suspected that these were the knives that possibly were involved with stabbing Michael, the 13-year-old. The fact that priceless objects in the house, including 2 air guns, a .40 caliber shotgun, 2 portable color television sets, a CB radio, an 8-track recorder, stereo equipment, cameras, and projectors were all plainly visible and unmoved, were instantly apparent to Detective Rose. More so, there was a wall safe that held close to $5,000 in cash. The safe had never been opened or touched. The costly objects that were left behind, the fact that the windows were intact, the rear door was closed, the front door showed no signs of forced entry or prying open, and the fact that the phone lines were not cut, in Detective Rose's judgment, clearly showed that robbery was not the motive. As the detectives continued to survey the house and gather evidence, they quickly decided that one of the children, Patty Columbo, was missing. She was 19 years old, and she was not there. The neighbors were naturally interested in the appearance of the police cars, investigators, and crime scene tape. But the lone survivor of the Columbo family massacre never showed up. Patty was called. She was informed by the police of what had happened to her family, and she never came to the crime scene. Later on, she was summoned by detectives to come to the police station in order to supply them with information. Although the detectives and law enforcement officers are aware that people react to disasters and grief in so many different diverse ways, even sometimes bizarre, at what would seem totally unacceptable to others may be totally acceptable for that person who's grieving. So we can't judge anyone by the way that they react to a certain situation. But police immediately became alarmed when Patty came to the police station, and the first thing she said was her father was connected to organized crime. Patty claims that Frank operated a mafia chop shop for stolen vehicles behind an auto parts store. She claimed that this most likely contributed to his death. Investigators recorded her account as well as the detail of her entire overly inflated version of what she felt happened to her family. Investigators also noted that Patty was very flirtatious with the male officers, police officers. Now, you're showing up to a police station to give a statement because your whole family has been murdered. and you're flirting with the officers that are there to interview you and help you process the situation. That was a very odd behavior from Patty, so they made sure that they recorded that, documented it. The autopsies of the Columbos were carried out by the Chicago County Chief Medical Examiner on Saturday, May 8th. Frank Columbo's body had irregular wounds from a blunt object. Most likely the bowling trophy or a large heavy crystal lamp discovered by Michael's body is what detectives suggested that had probably caused those wounds to Frank's body. Frank also had 4 bullet wounds to his body, one to the left side of his head, one behind his ear on the left side, one on the right side of his face, and one on the left side of his face. In addition, he had injuries from a sharp object and 4 missing teeth from his jaw. The coroner surmised that due to Mary Columbo's gunshot wound to her face between her eyes, that she had instantly passed away when her body hit the ground. She was probably already dead when her throat was sliced. Her heart had already stopped beating. Michael Columbo had also been fatally shot in the head at close range. He was shot, beaten with a large object, and then his neck and chest were stabbed or punctured more than 90 times. The medical examiner believed the puncture and stab wounds were shallow enough to suggest that a female may have carried them out. At the time of Michael's autopsy, 1 foreign hair was found on the front of his t-shirt. It was later discovered that that hair was an identical match to his sister Patty's hair. The family's stomach contents and the absence of rigor mortis led the medical examiner to believe that the Columbos passed away between the hours of 11 p.m. on May 4th and 5 a.m. on May 5th. While searching the Thunderbird, the Elk Grove Police Department, the evidence technician noticed some stains on the outside of the vehicle. 5 feet away, he could see dark maroon or crimson smudges on the trunk, which he speculated might have been caused by grease or blood. Regrettably, the smudges could not be collected. They had been polluted. The car's fender and the trunk both had handprints on them. These prints were taken from a left hand that either had no index finger or had no left index finger that could leave a fingerprint impression. Glass, takeout bags, and fast food restaurant boxes, and also an artificial stem that was covered in blood that resembled the one found on Mary's body were all found on the car's inside interior floor. A refraction technician analyst took a piece of glass and revealed that that glass might have come from the broken lamp base discovered on the Columbo's living room floor. The Elk Grove Police Department received a call from the Wooddale Police Department. The officer reported to them that the 1972 Oldsmobile 98 that was belonging to Mary Columbo had been discovered in a parking lot of condominiums. This happened later that same day on a Saturday. Wooddale was about 5 minutes from Elk Grove Village, and the Wooddale police officer said that he had responded when one of the tenants living in the condominiums called and notified the police. He said that when he arrived, nothing seemed to be out of place. There was no damage to the vehicle, and of course the tags came back. They didn't say stolen. But the resident of the building said that when he left that morning on May 5th at around 5:30 a.m. for work, the vehicle was not parked there. But when he returned that evening at 5:30 p.m. from work, the vehicle was there. Police called an evidence technician to come out and look over the vehicle. They were able to collect 5 fingerprints, and they also found 2 different kinds of cigarette butts from the ashtray. They found a blue blanket from the back seat with red stains on it, and a portion of a roof liner on the vehicle had been taken off. On Monday, May 10th, 1976, the funerals for Frank, Mary, and Michael Columbo were held. The normal operating procedure of a homicide investigation usually has a detective attend the services because they want to notice the actions and the movements of family members. They want to see if there's anything suspicious that can possibly help them to solve the case. In this particular situation, because Patty was observed flirting with some of the younger officers during her interview at the police station, the detectives decided to send a young officer, a young, handsome officer, along with them to the services. Although Patty had brought her boyfriend, a man named Frank Deluca, to the service, Deluca repeatedly sat alone off to the side where Patty openly flirted with the police. It was so brazen with the cop that the relatives who had heard of Deluca but not yet met him assumed the cop was her boyfriend. Frank's older brother, who lived only a block from the Columbo residence, recalled that he and Patty had verbally argued over Patty's desire to have her family cremated. It went against the Catholic beliefs of the Columbos, and the brother of Frank did not want this to happen. Patty did not cry. She did not show any visible signs of emotion, care, or concern. Patty never showed any type of care or concern and never shedded a tear over the loss of her parents and her brother Michael prior to the services. The day of the funeral, Patty stood outside and she was so flirtatious with the officer that her behavior sent red flags to the seasoned detectives. She laughed and joked, she had cigarettes, and she talked loudly as if she was at some type of family barbecue instead of the services for her brother and her parents. But when she went inside the church, she began wailing and crying, and she threw herself over the slate gray coffins that held the earthly remains of her father, her mother, and her brother. The coffins were closed due to the extreme damage inflicted on their bodies during the last moments of life. Detectives checked into Patty's suggestion that Frank Columbo had been tied into the mob, and it came up empty. Although Patty tried to tarnish her father's reputation, detectives found nothing. They found nothing that would tie him into the mob or any illegal activity, period. Instead, they turned their investigation to Patty. They decided to focus on Patty. Patty had a reputation of swinging. Her and Frank had been having sex with other women and allowing Frank to photograph her, make videos of her, and do all type of other sexually explicit acts with her and other women and couples while documenting it. Neither Frank nor Mary Columbo were aware of the illicit relationship between their daughter and her boss. When Patty decided to move out of her Brentwood home with her parents in 1974, her parents gave their blessing. They thought that Patty, who had been a troubled youth, was doing something responsible, that Frank Deluca had taken her into his family home to assist him and his wife with their 5 children. So the parents figured that she would be an assistance and probably receive food and shelter and maybe a couple of dollars just to help out. But they figured this was a good thing because Patty had been such a troubled youth. Now, when Patty moved into the Deluca home, she and Frank continued engaging in sexual acts, while Marilyn Deluca and the 5 children were busy. They would be in another room in the yard, and at some point, Patty's parents found out. They found out that she was involved with a man twice her age who was married and had children, and she also had the reputation of being a swinger. People were talking. At this point, needless to say, Frank Columbo was understandably upset and very disapproving about Patty's relationship with Frank Deluca. Patty lived with the Delucas for about a year before she came running back home in the summer of 1975. She told her father that she was done with Deluca and that she wanted her own place. Her father, Frank, was likely very thrilled that the affair was over, and although Patty was lying, she was very convincing to her parents. She didn't tell her parents that not only was she still very much involved with Deluca, but also that Deluca and his wife had separated because his wife, Marilyn, had found out about the affair. Frank helped Patty to find an apartment in Lombard, Illinois. Lombard is a small community located about 15 miles south of Elk Grove Village. Frank agreed that he would pay his daughter's rent each month. Needless to say, he was less than happy when he found out not only was Patty still seeing Deluca, but the apartment in Lombard apparently he was paying for was also the couple's love nest. Deluca had immediately moved in with Patty. Unbeknownst to her father, he had been footing the bill for this grown adult man to lay with his teenage daughter. He was disgusted. In August of 1975, a month before Marilyn Deluca filed for divorce, Frank approached Patty and Deluca in the parking lot of the Walgreens that they worked at. He ordered Deluca to leave his daughter Patty alone, and a violent confrontation ensued. According to Deluca, Frank pointed a rifle at Deluca's head and said, "I'm not going to blow your head off." When Deluca crunched down, Frank hit him across the mouth with the butt of the rifle, knocking Deluca completely to the ground. When Deluca began to get up, Frank hit him again with the rifle butt, this time in the stomach. Deluca claimed that Frank then said, "You're dead, you mother sucker." Patty filed a complaint and he had her father arrested for assault. Frank was arrested and tossed in jail, but Patty soon withdrew the complaint against her father. Reportedly, once he was out, Frank made plans to disown Patty. Now remember, Frank Columbo was a wealthy man. He had worked hard his life, and he had earned and accumulated a nice amount of wealth. The Columbos apparently had little or no contact with Patty until the winter or early spring of 1976. When Patty decided to apparently try and mend fences, Patty and Deluca planning to marry after Deluca divorced his wife, and the divorce was finalized that year in the end of May. The couple said they were going to marry in June. According to Deluca, the Columbos had accepted the relationship and were even going to give them a brand new washer and dryer set as a wedding gift. On May 12, 1976, the Elk Grove Police Department called Frank and Patty into the police station to get fingerprints. When the technician was taking Deluca's prints, he immediately noted that Deluca was missing his index finger. He was also missing the tip of his middle finger on his left hand. The technician also noted that neither Patty or Deluca had any types of nicks, scrapes, or scabs on their hands. 2 days later, on May 14th, detectives spoke with a 25-year-old Lonnie Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell had plenty to say. He had information on Patty and also on Frank. Mitchell was a car salesman, and he had first met Patty back in September of 1975 through a friend of hers. Mitchell said that he had offered Patty money to go out with him and his 34-year-old friend, Roman Subcribe. Patty told Mitchell that she was living with her boyfriend, but she needed money badly. She also mentioned that her father had struck her boyfriend in the head with a rifle butt. In October, Mitchell and his friend Roman met up with Patty at the Where Else Club. They drank and they danced and they had a good time. Under the impression that Mitchell was a heavy who did favors for his friends, Patty tried to call a favor in. During the course of the evening, Patty decided to have a conversation with Mitchell. She had an impression that he was some type of heavy. You know, the type of guy that you would call when you wanted something taken care of. He was like the strong arm man. He would call you when he had the job done, no questions asked. So she asked Mitchell about the possibility of maybe letting a little something happen with her parents. She expressed to Mitchell that she wanted them dead. She wanted him to kill her parents. Mitchell went along with the whole scheme. He figured, hey, let's see what I can get out of this and see how far it goes. Mitchell told her that he would do it for $10,000 a person, $20,000 total. He had quickly assured her that the job would be taken care of. He would later tell detectives that he had no intentions on killing her parents or getting anyone else to do it. He was playing a game with Patty. He never intended on collecting any money, but he wanted to make her think that he was this tough guy that she can depend on so that he can simply have sex with her. According to Mitchell, Patty called him multiple times throughout October of 1975. She wanted to know when he was going to kill her parents, and he continued to stall her. He asked her, hey, just calm down. I'll let you know when I'll get ready to carry through with this plan. Please don't keep calling me about this. Eventually, to make Patty feel more at ease and make her believe that Mitchell was going to go through with this, he started asking her for her parents' activities and schedules. He said, hey, I need to know everything that your parents do so I can have a clear and precise schedule and a timeline when I go to make the assassination. In return, Patty provided him with a floor plan, a drawing of her parents' home, and she also informed him that there was a wall safe, a television, a CB radio, furs in the closets, and diamonds. By November, Patty was again demanding to know when the killings would take place. According to Mitchell, she wanted it done around Christmas so that it would be some type of sick gift to herself. Roman, Mitchell's friend, told Mitchell that in order for him to carry through and be a part of this plan, he wanted his payment up front. Patty told them both that she didn't have any cash. She said that after they killed her parents, she would cash in the insurance policy and she would pay them out of the policy. In order to stall them, Patty decided to have sex with both Roman and Mitchell. She had multiple encounters with them to assure them and try to bribe them to continue to go through with this plan of being her hitman. After the sexual encounters, Patty felt comfortable enough to know in her mind that the plan was secure. She started giving Mitchell photographs of her family and what she amounted to as a dossier of day-to-day activities and schedules. Patty took him to her parents' home. Mary answered the door and Mitchell panicked. He left the property and he drove down the street. When Patty rejoined him, she told him that she and Mary had an argument about Deluca and Patty wanted her parents killed that night. She said she had left the patio door unlocked so that he can come into the home when it was dark and take care of business. Another month of stalling went by and January rolled around. In January of 1976, Mitchell said that Patty told him that Roman had to kill her brother also. She wanted her 13-year-old brother killed. She said that because he might figure things out later. So later that month, Patty informed Mitchell that she had once again left the patio doors unlocked and that she was anxious. Her and Deluca were anxious, and they both wanted this job taken care of. Mitchell continued to stall Patty. By this time, it's mid-March. He tells Patty, hey, we need that upfront money. And Patty told him that neither she nor Deluca had any money, and again questioned when the hit would go down. When Mitchell was interviewed by the police later, he again reiterated to the police that he was not a hitman. He said he never had any intentions on killing Frank, Mary, or Michael Columbo. He simply wanted to keep stringing Patty along, to have sex with her, and maybe get a little money out of her. He said that's why months and months went past and he never made any movement because he never intended to hurt her family. He just intended to swindle her out of money and get as much sex as he could. When detectives later picked up Roman, he was a recruiting officer for the Cook County Department of Personnel. He was a married man and a father of 3. Despite being held at the police station for 5 or 6 hours until the following morning, he refused to talk. He would also refuse to speak before the grand jury later. After Roman decided that he would not cooperate with the police, they were still able to collaborate Mitchell's story through Carolyn Tigert. Carolyn was Mary Columbo's sister. Carolyn recalls visiting her sister late in 75 or early 76, and she says Patty had showed up saying that she was there to pick up something. And she soon left right after that, without picking up anything. Whatever it was that she claimed she had been there for, she didn't get. Carolyn recalled Mary, Patty's mom, being upset and wondering why her sliding patio door was unlocked. She vividly remembers that she had locked the door and made sure that it was secured earlier that day. And after Patty left, it was unlocked again. After the statement from Carolyn, Mary's sister, the police felt that they had enough information to go back to the grand jury and ask for a warrant. That warrant was granted. And on May 15, 1976, just before 7 in the morning, 7 officers from the Cook County Sheriff's Department went to the apartment of Patty and Deluca in Lombard with a search warrant in hand. Patty and Deluca were both arrested and charged with conspiracy, solicitation, and the murders of Frank, Mary, and Michael. Although Deluca was released on May 17th, Patty was not. The day she was brought in, she gave a written and an oral statement admitting her guilt to soliciting 2 men to murder her family, but she claimed she knew nothing about the murders themselves. She continued to lie to the detectives, telling them that she did not know Lanny Mitchell until they showed her Lanny face to face. He had been in another room being interviewed at the exact same time she was being interviewed. She told the detectives that she didn't believe that Lanny had killed her family. When Patty was questioned about the dossier that she had written for Mitchell and Roman, she claimed that she did so under duress. She claimed that they held her by gunpoint and forced her to write that. She also claimed that she was forced to have sex with both men. Patty would later be found to be a liar when a handwriting expert told the judge that she didn't write this under duress. She wrote this willingly, and there was no stress involved in his handwriting. Patty went on to say that the reason she never went to the police while this whole conspiracy was going on, she says she was afraid, she was terrified. She was afraid that Mitchell and Roman would kill her. So she wanted the police to find out what had happened on their own, and when they discovered everything, she would verify it, because then she wouldn't be afraid, because those 2 men would be in jail. Patty continued to claim that she was in fear of her life. The detectives didn't believe her. They continued to question her, and at one point they asked Patty about her being behind on her rent. Why is your rent overdue? They wanted to highlight this because it showed her need and desperation for money. Now, she had told Mitchell and Roman that she wanted the money from the life insurance policy, so they knew that she was desperate for money, and that was a reason, one of the reasons anyway, for her to be in such a dire need of money, because she couldn't even pay her rent. On May 26, Roman was offered immunity. He was given an opportunity to testify against Patty for immunity. They said that even eventually he'd testify against Deluca. After accepting the deal, he spoke to detectives about Patty and Deluca. Roman's story corroborated everything that Mitchell had said. He even went so far as to tell detectives that he had once spoken to Deluca on the phone, and Deluca claimed that Frank Columbo had taken out a contract on him, and that Columbo would also have him killed. On July 17, 1976, Frank Deluca was arrested once more. He was tossed into the Cook County Jail to await his trial. While Frank was incarcerated in the Cook County Jail, he befriended one of the inmates named Clifford Childs. They became cellmates, and for the next 6 months, according to Mr. Childs, Deluca had bragged that he had become a perfect killer, and a plan that he executed after he put together. And he claimed that each one of the members of the Columbo family had been personally shot by him. Deluca says that he purposely delayed the meeting until 10 p.m. And when he arrived at 10 p.m., he said that that would give him an alibi for Walgreens. When he went to the door, he rang the doorbell, and it was Frank Columbo who answered the door. When Frank turned around to walk away, Deluca walked up the stairs and shot him from the back with a .32 caliber revolver. He then shot Mary, and he and Patty had gone to Michael's room where the boy was sleeping. They woke him up, forced him to stand, and Deluca shot him in the head. He says he made it appear as if it was a robbery by messing up the house. He took $150 in cash, some jewelry, and a small household appliance that he put in Frank Columbo's Thunderbird, which was driven to the west side of the neighborhood where the police found it and abandoned. Deluca and Patty had expected that the car would be broken into. Deluca said that he and Patty expected that all the contents that they left in the car would be stolen and later tracked back to the Columbo's house, solidifying that a robbery was the motive and that some innocent person would be blamed for this murder when they came up with those stolen goods. But that plan didn't work out for them. Deluca told his cellmate that he and Patty wore gloves. He says that they were inside the house no more than 25 minutes, and he even went so far as to stuff some type of material into the glove that he had, the missing index finger, in order to make police believe that this was someone who had 5 full digits on each hand. But police didn't believe that, because remember, when they originally had the first set of fingerprints, the fingerprint technician said that, hey, either this person is not picking up a fingerprint on that index finger or he doesn't have one. So police had already discovered that there was something flawed with that index finger. Deluca's cellmate Childs would later testify against him. In September of '76, Deluca asked Childs if he could kill 2 witnesses or have someone that he knew as a hitman to take care of these 2 witnesses. He said that the witnesses were going to testify against him. They were employees who worked at Walgreens who would testify that he was not at work that night. Now remember, Deluca wanted to use this as an alibi, and that's why he took the initial meeting from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock so that he can claim that he was at work during those hours. Well, those employees did not corroborate his story, and they said that he's flat out lying, and they were willing to testify in court to say that he wasn't present at work. Childs told Deluca that he would take care of the 2 hits if he paid his bail money to get him out of the Cook County Jail, and if he gave him $10,000 per hit. Deluca gave Childs a description of the 2 potential victims. One of the ladies was a woman that was married, and she was a person that he had had an affair with in the past before he met Patty. He also detailed directions on how to get to their homes. He included their personal activities and as much information as he could think of about the 2 potential victims. The plan was that Deluca's ex-wife Marilyn was to bail Childs out of jail. Once he was out, he was to abduct the 2 victims, kill them, and bury their bodies somewhere in Indiana. On November 25, 1976, Marilyn Deluca sent 2 money orders totaling just over $3,400 to Childs, and then another $830 as the 2 money orders were not sufficient. On February 24, 1977, Marilyn Deluca picked up Childs and drove him to her home. She gave him another $1,300 in cash. She also allowed him to use Deluca's car. Just like Mitchell and Roman, Charles denied ever wanting to kill anyone. He stated that he would just use Marilyn until the money ran dry, and he'd just play her until she figured it out. He was basically providing him with everything he needed, a means of transportation and also pocket money. So he was going to go along with this scheme as long as he could. During the trial, prosecutors also reminded the court that Patty was still on probation. Patty had been on probation for a theft of an employee's credit card and unauthorized use from working at Walgreens in the cosmetics department. Patty and Deluca went to trial just over a year after the murders. They both chose to be represented in court by a jury of their peers. The physical, the forensic, and all the other evidence combined, along with the testimonies of Mitchell, Roman, Charles, and two of Deluca's former co-workers, they all recounted statements against these two. They recounted statements and or confessions that these two made against the Columbo family and the murders. These were guaranteed convictions. The jury returned after a few hours of deliberation to find them both guilty on all accounts. Judge Eugene Pickham sentenced both Patty and Deluca to 200 to 300 years on each of the three murder counts. Additionally, on the solicitation to commit murder, Patty was sentenced 25 to 50 years to run concurrently with any other sentence. Deluca was sentenced to 50 years also. Frank Deluca was sent to Dixon Correctional Center in October of 1977 to serve out his sentence. But after 1986, he had had no disciplinary infractions or tickets, and under Illinois law, he, like Patty, became eligible for parole because they had served 12 years. In a parole hearing in May of 2014, Deluca told the Illinois Prisoner Review Board that he had no expectation of being paroled and that what he and Patty had did was horrendous. He then went on to say he should never leave prison. At that time, the parole board noted that he was in poor health, had a bad hip, prostate problems, and he walked with a cane. Deluca moved for a new trial on July 25th of 1977, a month after he was convicted. On August 8th of 1977, Patty filed for a motion for a new trial. The court denied both. Both defendants filed appeals, and both defendants were denied, again in 1983. They went on to also say that the parole could not be supported because of the seriousness and the offense, and this promoted the disrespect of the law. Deluca's former wife, Marilyn, died in 2020. She died in her home, and she left behind 5 children and 16 grandchildren. Patty Columbo was sent to Dwight Correctional Center in October of 1977 to serve her sentence. But 2 years into her sentence, in 1979, she was implicated in a prison prostitution ring. This scheme was organized by her, and it was a sexual scheme with acts that were committed from female inmates with the male correctional officers. She also racked up approximately 20 infractions, or as we call them, tickets in some places, with the last noted being in 2004 for contraband, unauthorized property, and in 2006 for unauthorized movement. She earned a secretarial science degree, an applied science degree in computer programming, and an associate's degree in art from Joliet Junior College in 1981. But in 1991, she earned a bachelor's degree from the Illinois State University. Patty received additional certificates for training in literacy, and she helped HIV and AIDS peer education and volunteered as a reading and math tutor for the Literacy Volunteer Program. In 1990 until 2006, she did that. She was also a trainer for new tutors from 1995 to 2006. While incarcerated, she worked as a clerk and as a programmer for Leisure Time Services and Family Services Program, as a secretary in the placement office, and she also helped to develop the prison media system, which is their center. Throughout the years, Patty, who preferred to be called Tricia, After incarceration, she called herself Trisha, maintained a group of supporters who would submit letters speaking on her behalf and basically talk about the good works that she had done since she had been in prison. And they would bring these things up at her parole hearings. In 2011, in anticipation of a parole hearing, she was accepted into Leslie's Place. Leslie's Place was a transitional house on the west side of Chicago that houses and helps former female inmates navigate their way back into society. It's ironic that had she been accepted and paroled there, she would have been living only 2.5 miles from the place that her father's car was left back in 1976. In 2013 or in 2014, when the Dwight Correctional Center closed, Patty was first moved to the Lincoln Correctional Center, and then she was moved to the Logan Correctional Center. But in 2014, she asked for a continuance on her parole hearing, and she did not want to leave the special needs inmates that she had been working with. She was continually denied, and parole was also denied. With the same notation as Deluca received, the parole board wrote in her chart that due to Patty's seriousness of her offense, it would promote disrespect for the law to allow her to be granted parole. Patty remains incarcerated in Logan Correctional Center. She has not seen or spoken to Frank Deluca since 1977. The investigator Raymond Rose, who was the investigator from the start of this case, who was 29 years old when this case started back in 1976, continues to speak against the release of Frank and Patty. He believes that Deluca shot all 3 victims and Patty stabbed and cut them. The motive, in his opinion, was money. Pure and simple greed. In January of 2023, Frank Deluca died at 12:35 a.m., apparently of natural causes. He was still incarcerated with the Illinois Department of Corrections at the time of his demise.